we're going to talk about, obviously, like, a lot of things you've learned from starting companies. And there's a lot of first-time entrepreneurs in the crowd, so advice you would give them. Like Jason did earlier, but you got to one-up him. Really tell the truth and, like, give people, the absolute pitfalls here, which I know you'll do because you got me in trouble in the last time I interviewed you for being too honest. So, first of all, I want to talk about risk because I'm of the belief, and I've written about this wildly, I think entrepreneurs... I think entrepreneurs are really taking less risk in Silicon Valley than they were 10 years ago. And I think you're interesting because, your other PayPal co-founders were considered really risky for getting back into the web as early as they were. Whether it was LinkedIn, whether it was funding Facebook, whether it was Slide, a lot of these they were really the pioneers in believing in the web again, which was considered crazy at the time. But you were considered crazier. I mean, you got done with PayPal, and you went and started a solar company, a rocket company, and an electric car company.
Right.
Like, it would be hard to come up with a crazier combination, and yet you've had a quicker IPO than those guys. You have, how many billions of dollars you're getting from NASA, from SpaceX?
Well, we're about 2.
Yeah. So, like, who's the crazy one now? I mean, you...
Exactly.
I mean, you told me before that, like, I asked you if you were crazy in an interview before, and you said, well, look, if I were thinking this is the best rank order investment, I would not have done these, because it would have been crazy.
Yes,
so,
absolutely.
What motivates you in taking, tell us about how you come up with an idea.
At Adeo, we were housemates in college, and that would have been actually really our first venture together was running a kind of a nightclub-ish situation.
Really? Yeah. Nightclub a euphemism?
No, it's really a nightclub. We had this. That's how we first met. We were actually just transfer students to UPenn and staying in like the storm situation, which was not a lot of fun. And so we're just talking in the cafeteria and like, well, we really want to get out of this dorm situation. So then we were able to find a house that was this huge house that hadn't been rented, and so it was like a 10-bedroom house, and there were just 2 of us. And then we managed to get this freshman to join us in the house. It changed his life forever, I think.
That freshman.
Well, it's hell.
Yes.
He took a different path after that year.
Can you tell us the most outrageous thing that happened in this nightclub?
What's the amendment you plead? The 5th? But I did have my mom there one night. Just like came to visit us, like, by the way, we're holding a kind of a party tonight, and anyway, that was a lot of fun. Adeo kind of took care of the entertainment and the decoration in the house. It was sort of like a New York nightclub, basically.
What was your role?
I was kind of the sober one.
You were the same one?
No, yeah. Wow, that's so relative. Anyway, so.
Right, so back to taking risks.
Yeah, so that was actually quite risky, by the way. If we'd been bust, we would have been in deep trouble. So let's see. So in college, I was trying to think of what are the 3 areas that would most affect the future of humanity, at least in my opinion. And the 3 areas that I could come up with were the internet, the transition to sustainable energy, both production and consumption, and space exploration, particularly making life multi-planetary. So it wasn't from the perspective of those were the things that I would expect to be involved in, but rather those were the things that I thought in the absolute would most affect the future of humanity. So those were the things that if I had the opportunity, I would like to get involved in. My initial thought was that I was to actually do something in electric vehicles. And so I actually came out of Silicon Valley, spent a couple of summers at a place called Pinnacle Research, which developed high-energy density ultracapacitors. They're super expensive. So I decided I was going to come to Stanford and do a PhD in applied physics and material science, and just kind of try to figure out if there was a way to mass produce supercapacitors, ultracapacitors at low enough price and high enough energy density for them to be a energy storage solution for electric vehicles. And that's what originally brought me out here. And that was in '95, and so I was trying to figure out, would this work or wouldn't it work? And this is one of those problems where you're not entirely sure whether success is one of the possible outcomes.
Right. Well, and that's one thing that VCs don't want to fund. That's really changed in Silicon Valley. There's this stigma associated with like so-called science fair projects.
Right. So like an ultracapacitor with that of low enough cost and high enough energy density to compete with batteries that's one of those things where you could spend several years and then the conclusion would be this is not possible.
Right.
So I thought, okay, well that was the path that I was involved on. You at least add something to the tree of knowledge. People notice the tree of knowledge. But that summer I was kind of just experimenting with some internet software, and I thought, well, I think the internet's going to be something that really fundamentally changes the world. It just seemed like the world was acquiring a nervous system. Like previously we were like this multicellular creature but without a nervous system, and now we have acquired a nervous system. You could be in the jungles of Africa, or
I have been much.
Right. No, I've been from Africa. I'm just from a small village in Africa. Great. Cool. Would you see the World Cup?
No, I'm the biggest loser. I went just before the World Cup, speaking at a conference, and then left, unfortunately. Did you go back to the World Cup?
No, I was doing Tesla IPO.
So do you think that people are taking it at first? Do you see people coming out of school and there's a lot of people who have said that America's lost its fascination with science. I mean, we don't have kids anymore growing up and wanting to be an astronaut. We don't have kids, in getting chemical sets for Christmas. I mean, you obviously were one of those kids who was very into science.
That's liability issues. Well, yeah, so my father was an engineer, and so I grew up in an engineering situation, electrical mechanical engineering, and but I think if that hadn't been the situation, then I would have had little exposure to it, even in South Africa. So I think one of the things maybe that engineers should have more kids. Whether it's nature or nurture, they're more likely to become engineers.
You're doing that. You have
I'm
right?
doing my civic duty. I've got to make up for lost ground with some others.
Okay, so this whole event is put on by the Funded, so let's talk about funding. You've started several companies in very wildly different spaces.
Yeah.
You've done quite well yourself. From what unless the numbers have changed, last I heard, you, I think, put it was 180 million between Tesla and SpaceX of your own money.
And a solar city, yeah. But,
right.
but really, but it's sort of around 100 million for SpaceX.
That's a
about
lot
70
of
million for
skin in
Tesla.
the game.
Yeah. That was all the skin I had, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
What?
All right.
I mean, all the skin you had meaning you were eating ramen noodles, or meaning you also had $1 million house? Like, how do you quantify that?
It was all the same. Basically, all liquid assets were sold. I don't even own my house. Yeah, and actually, as was publicized, I had to borrow some money from friends late last year to fund living expenses.
So let's talk about this whole idea of having that degree of skin in the game. I mean, there's a lot of people who make a lot of money and invested in their friends' companies and become angels. I mean, you didn't go that route. There's also a lot of people who just want to keep that money and want to raise a lot of venture capital. I mean, you had crazy ideas, but you also had already had a success. You probably could have raised venture capital. Why put that much of your own money? Was it out of need? Was no one going to fund a rocket company?
Yeah, well, the sort of surprise thing came really in 2007 when it was clear that Tesla was in a very difficult position and would need to recapitalize the company, essentially double fund the company. So just to sort of, it was either that or let Tesla die.
And why was
So-
Tesla in that position?
That is a long answer. Just there've been a number of mistakes made by the management team there that just were very expensive mistakes, and a lot of them, and they've not been brought to light until kind of really the 13th hour. So we had sort of scaled up production inventory, so we spent a lot of capital on production inventory, but there were a lot of parts that had been ordered that were wrong, that didn't work, that were out of spec, that just didn't, just problematic. So we had huge write-offs on inventory, and we had to redesign a whole bunch of parts and resource, change suppliers in a number of cases.
Did you do a recap?
Yeah, we had to. It wasn't actually. Well, it was kind of a bridge load, so it wasn't a crown down round or anything like that.
Right.
So,
And how close were you to dying?
well, it would have. So that was the fundamental issue. Either I had a choice of either taking all my reserve capital and applying it to Tesla, basically all free capital, or Tesla would die. Those are the two choices. And finding funding from investors when the company was in the state it was in, there was no chance. We would not survive any diligence process.
So, across your companies, on a scale of 1 to 5, what have been your experiences with venture capital? 1 being, I guess we'll go with the voting order tonight. 1 being the worst and 5 being the best. I mean, people, VCs get a lot of shit, but they are, to some degree, the lifeblood of this industry. I mean, where do you fall in that? Have you had good experiences or mostly bad experiences?
I think probably medium.
George Zachary said you can't give 3s.
Well, I think it varies considerably based on which venture capitalist is doing the deals. I think that probably varies maybe as wildly as the individual entrepreneurs. I think there are some good venture capitalists, but most are not.
Go on.
No, there's some. I think, just like there's some. Only a few companies ultimately succeed. I think the same is probably true of venture capitalists.
But aren't there more successful venture capitalists who aren't very nice to startups than there are not very good entrepreneurs who succeed?
There's a lot of both. I'm not sure who'd win the numbers contest there. I do think there's been a lot of bad behavior by venture capitalists and probably a lot of bad behavior by entrepreneurs. So I think my experiences were actually pretty good. With MDV and then with Sequoia. Yeah.
So is there any that you're
I
leaving
think
out?
DFJ is, my experience with DFJ has been very good as well. And Founders Fund. Yeah. So I'd say actually, now that I think about it, actually probably, if I give my experiences a 4 out of, if 5 is the best rating.
What's one of the toughest lessons that you learned that might be applicable to this audience in terms of raising outside money? I mean, what are the big pitfalls you don't want to fall into, whether it's angel or venture capital?
Well, I think it's better to take a lower valuation from venture capitalists that you really like and get along with and feel that you're sort of on the same wavelength. It's better to take a lower valuation from that person than a higher valuation from someone who you think you may not get along with. So, yeah.
And so that sounds like it's more about the individual partner versus the firm. I mean, there's a lot of entrepreneurs who come to Silicon Valley and are dying to get an investment from Sequoia, not necessarily an investment from Roll Up or from Mike or,
I think
partners were smart.
I think both matter. Both the individual partner and the firm. I think probably the partner matters slightly more than the firm, but they both matter because that partner could leave that firm and then you suddenly find yourself with a new board member that you didn't anticipate. That happened to me in one case that I won't talk about. But that was the lead partner of that firm sucks beyond belief.
You're gonna say that, and you're not gonna tell us who it is.
Sure, people could guess.
So obviously a lot of your success, particularly with Tesla.
None of the names I've mentioned, by the way.
All right, so it's not Sequoia, it's not DFJ, it's not. I'm trying to remember who else you mentioned. Refresh the ones it's not. It's not Founders Fund.
I think very highly of DFJ and Founders Fund, and obviously Sequoia's reputation is great, and NDV's fine. So none of the names I mentioned are my own references.
I'll do Google search. What do you think about the way venture capital has changed in the time you've been out here? I mean, a lot of money has flowed into the asset class. The bust notwithstanding, more money was flowing into the asset class. The returns of, once 99 and 2000 fall off will be at or below the S&P 500, which has never happened in the industry before. Is this industry viable? Do you think it's broken? Do you think there's just too much money that needs to get out?
Well, I do think that probably there should be a broader scope of investments that venture capitalists consider in Silicon Valley. I think there's a little too much of people kind of focusing on IT or focusing on silicon, because that's kind of the stuff that's gone before. I think that there needs to be kind of a broader, a look at multiple different industries, and then I think there's probably not too much capital. I think there's probably too much capital chasing the obvious stuff.
So how do you think we're doing on clean tech? There was a lot of hype several years ago that clean tech would be the next big wave of Silicon Valley. If you look at it as we started with semiconductors, that went to computers, went to software, enterprise software, and sort of everything spiraled up to the web. There's a lot of people who argue that's kind of the logical conclusion of that wave, and we need a new wave. A lot of people wanted that to be clean tech. During the presidential debates, Barack Obama said clean tech is the new PC for America in terms of creating companies and creating jobs. But there's a lot of people who feel that basic investment of science is sort of not being done. The stuff that was done in the early days of the internet, that in computer, that drove a lot of that. Do you think that we're all talk when it comes to clean tech, or do you think that people are taking risk and really building that foundation?
I do think that clean tech is the kind of the new wave, and the potential value creation there, I think, is probably greater than on the internet. Just look at the size of the economy that energy constitutes. It's huge, way bigger than the internet. And we are, it's sort of almost tautological that we're going to have to move to sustainable production and consumption of energy. It's not sustainable. It's sooner or later, yeah. So I do think there's actually a lot of opportunity there, and we will see a lot of value creation in the clean tech space. Tesla's done pretty well. I think one of the, I'm not sure how we rank, but I think we're one of the better IPOs this year.
But I mean, that's sort of the question is, when it comes to people who want to invest in clean tech, like, who's willing to write the check? I mean, you had to put a lot of your own money into Tesla.
Yeah.
So does that mean only wealthy entrepreneurs start clean companies? I mean, do you think there's the willingness for people to write the big checks to really develop this space? I mean, Tesla is not a web company where you can invest $50,000 and get a product out.
No, but if you look at something like PayPal, people might assume that PayPal was not a high capital endeavor, but we spent about the same, actually maybe more, on PayPal before going public than we've done on Tesla. So PayPal was like maybe $250, $300 million that of investment before going public. So it wasn't a small change. It is a little harder to get like a demonstration article when you're talking about physical hardware than they took it. It's a website and you can do some quick demoware and whatnot. But I think in terms of capital, I think that there is, I think there's actually sort of a misapprehension about the capital needs of an internet startup versus, say, a car company or a solar company or something like that. And in fact, the most capital efficient company so far, which will be and is actually my highest return on investment, is Solar City. By far.
We never hear about Solar City. Tell us about it. How much did you put in? How much is it doing? What is? That's a bold statement of the three.
Yeah. Well, it's just factually true. It's not the largest. It's not the largest return in absolute dollars, but it's the largest return on investment. Yeah. I think it's at this point 10x with 10x with my original investment in my portion of the company. Actually, maybe more than that. Maybe 12x.
Wow.
And that's in the course of 4 years. Something like that, yeah.
It's not bad.
4 years. Yeah. And it's not like the economy is good.
Yeah.
So that's I think a great company, well, I should be clear. In the case of Solar City, I don't consider myself a co-founder of Solar City.
Okay.
Well, I did actually suggest the idea to Lyndon and Peter Wright that this is an area that they should pursue once they're done with their other company. But I didn't put enough, I'd say, perspiration into Solar City to really warrant the co-founder status.
I have 2 quick questions, and then I think maybe we're going to open up to the audience.
We'll take a couple questions.
Okay, so just real quick. So, I'm interested because I think there's a lot of founders in this room. There's a lot of people with good ideas. And there's this issue in Silicon Valley of whether or not you can be a founder but have to stay the CEO. A lot of people like Sequoia, who you mentioned, tend to bring in a lot of other people to be CEOs. Founders Fund was started with the idea of, no, statistically, the people who build the biggest companies are when the founder stays involved the whole way. You kind of step away from Tesla, came back.
Right.
I think, are you still the CEO of both SpaceX and Tesla?
Yeah.
So, what is your view on this? Does the founder need to stay the CEO?
Well, I think what Founders Fund says is true. I mean, if you look at, say, Apple or Oracle, or Microsoft before Gates left. It's true. I think that the biggest companies, most successful companies, are the ones run by their founders or.
Wait, I have one more question. Oh, you're funny for the founders, not you were flat. I'm done. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, the last time I interviewed Elon, I asked him a question, and he called someone a douchebag, and I laughed because I thought it was funny. And I got written up in New York media as like a horrible person for laughing that someone was called a douchebag. So I don't want to get into your personal issues at all, but I just want to give you this forum if there's anyone else you'd like to call a douchebag.
I think a little carried away in that interview. New York Times did print a correction, but the thing with corrections on the article, the guy that was a douchebag, because he was. And they did print a correction to the douchebaggy article he wrote, but nobody reads corrections. So
and it was the fundamental premise of the article. It wasn't.
Yeah, it was just incredibly misleading. I should have said it was irresponsible and misleading and intentionally so. Ergo, he's a douchebag.
Right. So I wasn't asking if you were apologizing for calling him a douchebag. I was asking if there's anyone else you want to call a douchebag. It seems all over the media train since we last met.
Yeah, it's actually not a long. It's a fairly short list. I don't think it would be wise for me to call someone a douchebag. That would just be repetitive. There was recently an article in the New York Times that was the same editor who wrote the attack piece on you. He did basically a bank shot with his buddy in the New York Post.
They did that on me last time.
Yeah, that's the guy. The guy that did the bank shot on you in the New York Post. That Sunday Times business editor. Sort of wrote a payback article. Had a sort of payback article written on me a couple weeks ago in the New York Times, which obviously that was not a great thing for him to do.
Let's take some. So, first, round of applause.
All right. We gotta do 3. I'm getting like beaten up over time, but people seem to be enjoying. I was transfixed. So 3 questions. Answer honestly. Whoa, there's a lot of hands. So.
All the questions. When do we have Elon here? These people have come in. Let them ask all the
Alright,
questions.
2.5 questions. No, okay. We have time? No? Well, alright.
What's your next? What are you doing next?
Well, I'm definitely focused on SpaceX and Tesla, and don't intend to start any companies for a while. I need to get a few things done with SpaceX and Tesla. At some point, I have a design in mind for an electric supersonic vertical technical landing plane. That would be like, I don't think there's been that much innovation in airplanes.
Not at all. As someone who just traveled the emerging world before, we will tell you not at all. Especially the coach.
Right, exactly. You got like the 777 and the 787, and it's these things are very, very incremental. Like they're like 10, 15% better than the last version. So I think it would just be worth trying to do something that's several generations beyond the current state of the art. The design in mind, I'm very confident would work. It's just a question of like what sort of range can you achieve, and how difficult will it be to achieve the level of reliability that people have come to expect in aviation. Those are really the tough parts. It's not will it work. It's definitely make it work. There's that, and I have a study for using aerospace construction techniques. So it's basically the high strength, low weight design techniques used in the space industry to create prefabricated metal sections of a double-decker highway system. So you can sort of drop them in place with minimal effect on the existing traffic pattern.
Is that going to be affordable for emerging markets? You can't even get through an intersection. It took me 7 hours to get through a median Mumbai, and less than 5% of it has cars. This is a massive need.
Yeah, I do think this actually would be, yes. So this would probably have the biggest, one of the biggest impacts if this can be done right. I'm not sure how well it would work in emerging markets. It kind of depends on sort of like materials cost versus labor trade-off. I'm confident it would work in, like in the U.S. or in Europe or something like that, where labor is kind of expensive, and the cost of traffic delays of adding a lane to a highway and having that temporarily reduce the amount of traffic, that's incredibly expensive. So I'm confident with that it would work economically in the U.S. And it might work. It might work in emerging markets, maybe for certain big cities. Yeah, exactly.
Elon's factory, by the way, in Los Angeles is incredible. All right, shoot.
My name is Casey Leon with Papi TV. I have a question. You have a SpaceX. Have you thought about evolving it into space tourism, similar to Virgin Galactica?
Well, with SpaceX, we do intend to carry astronauts to the space station, essentially take over the crew transport role of the space shuttle. And there's a big battle that's been fought recently in Congress over this as to whether it's going to be kind of a government-run system or whether it makes sense to outsource astronaut transport. There appears that the commercial route is winning. And so if we're carrying NASA astronauts, I think we certainly also want to carry private astronauts. And then ultimately, the long-term goal for SpaceX is to try to move us in the direction of becoming a multi-planet species and staying like on Earth. That's sort of, so obviously that involves a lot of carrying people and cargo.
I don't need to know. Hey, that pencil
Wait, you
is.
can stay CEO of both?
What?
Because you're going to pick, right? At some point. You can't stay CEO of both SpaceX and
You
Tesla.
can do whatever he wants. That's your rule, right?
No, you said last time
You
I heard you
can't
talk,
do
you said
this.
this is not sustainable to do both.
I think I agree. It is very difficult to sustain in the long term. The workload is beyond the fun point. Yeah, I mean, and I'm not sure that somebody should be CEO of a company forever either. So I think that at some point in the future, not in the near term, but at some point in the future, I'll have to probably just be running one company.
This is your first public experience in Silicon Valley speaking, right? Since you went public with Tesla.
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right, let's take a few more questions.
All right. AJ Thomas with Semantic Seed and the Gen Y blogger. I wanted to ask you, do you really plan on retiring on Mars?
Well, I can't say it's like I'm certain that I will retire on Mars, because that requires a lot of things have to happen between here and there. I think it would be cool to do that. So that is not predictive. It is just saying that, like, aspirationally, if best of all possible situations, then yeah, it would be great to ultimately retire on Mars.
Mars 1.0 will be very utopian, though. Let's be honest. It's not going to be filled with a bunch of day laborers who are like, "What do I do?" It's going to be like the great minds of humanity.
Engineer colony.
It kind of would be sort of. I mean, I think of necessity, it would be somewhat of an engineer colony, just because you got to build a lot of stuff and design a lot of stuff. So.
Hi, my name is Uday. I'm the founder of Live on Campus. Elon, I wanted to ask you, we hear a lot about the personalities of a founder or CEO. Both you and Jason are obviously very successful, but slightly different personalities, I'd say. I'm curious, do you feel, I mean, were you always this way as being more low-key, or did you sort of mellow into kind of the personality you have now?
Well, yeah, Dave could probably answer that better than I could.
Yeah, that's a question for Deo.
He was the biggest dork I've ever met. He's actually de-dorkified like 100-fold. Between over 20 years, you're much cooler. I mean, I remember like, when it's actually enjoyable to hang out with him, but back then it was kind of painful. He'd be like, he literally was the straight man, didn't drink. I'd always be like, Elon, I think the police are here. Can you go deal with it? He's like, sure, I'm fine.
Yeah, I didn't drink in college actually. I mean, not from I just didn't like this alcohol really. And then
It's a flavor issue.
Thank you. Your work is just impressive, sincerely impressive. One of the catalysts, I think, with being an entrepreneur is trying to do things that motivate you and things that you love. The money always comes second, usually. So how much has focusing on humanity actually improved your own personal happiness?
that's a good question.
You have been successful there, so,
Yeah.
with some ideas that were pretty far out.
Yeah, that's true. Well, definitely my personal happiness took a big dive when around 2007, when Tesla's difficult situation became apparent, and I had to substantially increase my time allocation. That was tough, In 2008 was worse, and 2009 was even worse. And in 2010, it's been much, much better.
It didn't go up. Cars coming out and people loving the cars and like solved a lot of these problems. It really was worse in 2008 and worse in 2009?
Well, okay, so probably the lowest point was late 2008 when the Tesla financing round fell apart because the economy went into a tailspin. The third SpaceX rocket launch failed, and I was getting divorced.
Triple whammy.
Yeah, that sucked. That really sucked. And then, fortunately, the fourth launch worked, and so for SpaceX, and we were able to close a financing, kind of an internal financing round. In basically, yeah, late Christmas Eve in 2008. Yeah.
Wow. Merry Christmas to Tesla.
Right. Exactly.
Elon, maybe just touch base on the significance of the recent launch and that it made the first time the success of that and what that really means to our country and our space program.
Sure. So Falcon 1 is our small rocket. That's the one that succeeded on its fourth launch. I'm certainly partly to blame there because I was the chief designer of the rocket. So.
Okay, wait. Here, I don't think people understand this about him, right? So, no. Like, this is crazy. Like, he's the chief designer of the rocket and one of the lead engineers in the car, on top of the CEO.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
What's happens to dorks in college?
With Falcon 9, fortunately, we succeeded on the first flight and were able to get to orbit. And Falcon 9 is what NASA has chosen to replace the cargo transport function of the space shuttle. So the space shuttle retires early next year, and Falcon 9 will be what to replace the cargo transport. That's a given, and then it's looking increasingly likely that it will replace the space shuttle as far as crew transport
But
as well.
let me help Keith phrase the question better. Give perspective. Like, how long did it take to develop a comparable payload rocket, and how much money? And how long did it take for you to develop the 9, and how much money? Just put like orders of magnitude.
Well, if you were to compare, say, the Falcon 9 to the Ares 1 vehicle, and there's actually two parts to it. There's Falcon 9 and our Dragon spacecraft, and then there's Ares 1 and the Orion spacecraft. So far, $10 billion has been spent on Ares 1 Orion, and it carries fewer people to the space station than Falcon 9 and Dragon. Between Falcon 1, Falcon 9, and Dragon, we've spent about $500 million. And there will be more spent between now and then because going for more test flights. But we probably.
But they will spend more too.
Yeah. No, it's true. So the estimated cost for completing Ares 1 Orion would be another 20 to 30 billion. For us, it would be probably to demonstrate crew and get through all that. Maybe it's another billion or 500 million, something like that. So we're somewhere in the maybe 5% of the cost.
Is that comparable to Tesla with electric car versus what was spent on the EV1? I mean, what is the delta? Is it similar?
So just in R&D cost on the Tesla Roadster, we spent about maybe 150 million thereabouts. And the EV1, I think they spent over $1 billion. So it's maybe not as significant a ratio, but it's still very significant. And the value of any company is the free cash flow that it generates versus the capital required to generate that free cash flow. That's really what defines market capital of any company in any industry. So if you want to build a valuable company, that's what you got to do. You got to figure out how do you make the capital generate a lot of free cash flow.
Robert Clegg, founder of Noverse, creating educational video games. You discover more life going underwater, more species we have no idea about, on a cost savings of hundreds of times. Any disasters in the relatively near future are not going to send our civilization into space. We're probably going to go underwater. Why aren't we exploring more underwater for cures, science, all these undiscovered species and new life forms? In your estimation, why aren't we going underwater with NASA instead of out in nowhere?
Well, I think that's not quite the right. If something were to happen that destroyed civilization on the surface of the Earth, I don't think that retreating underwater is really a viable option. And it's difficult to say what way is that thing. The civilization is not going to last forever. So if at some point in the future, something bad will happen, or maybe some set of bad things will happen. Probably not. There's probably a series of things that would happen that would destroy civilization. I don't think there's enough separation. Like, let's say we had underwater colonies or something. I don't think you'd really have enough separation between land, what's going on land, and what's going on underwater to really not have what affects one affect the other. But if you have different planets that are separated by hundreds of millions of miles, then even if something really terrible happened on Earth, I think you'd probably be okay on the other planet, and life as we know would continue to exist. So that's my theory on that.
So one, we got to get back to the business of awarding a winner and the cheesy trophy. There's one last we got probably most of the house is entrepreneurs. Judges, if you want to get ready, because we're going to speed through this. One parting thought for them, inspiration, comment, anything.
Well, actually, I kind of like a quote from a friend of mine, Boli, about starting companies, which is, it's like eating glass and staring into the abyss of death.
But occasionally,
that's some
IPO.
feeling. Start a company.
Well, let's hope we pick a winner. Eating glass and staring at the abyss of death.